think you're actually on that.
No one's buying it.
I don't know, man. Dude, people do that. They play black-white. That's like a whole thing. That's like a thing people do. All right, Greg, starting it off with a basic swamp.
So this matchup used to be very much about Pack Rat. In your opinion, what's the mirror match about now, especially game one?
It's mostly not about Pack Rat. It's mostly Underworld connections, I think. The extra card advantage, I mean, Pack Rat can help a lot, but both players have answers and Bio Blight to help clean that up. Mostly, though, I think you just want to be the guy who's drawing extra cards with Erebos and Thoughtseize and Underworld connections and things like that. I mean, Thoughtseize because it takes the other person's Underworld connections and Erebos.
So Ben starts with the action. He's on the mulligan to 6. He Thoughtseizes on the draw. Sees a hand of 3 lands, one of which is Mutavault, Nightveil, Spectre, Grey Merchant, and Hero's Downfall. Takes the Nightveil Spectre. Greg with a Temple on his second turn. Temple off the top for Ben. Leaves it on top.
I mean, both of these decks are basically just a whole bunch of creatures and a whole bunch of removal. So both players are just going to bash their cards into each other. The ability to draw extra cards is potentially huge, you know, because, I mean, neither player has an answer to Underworld connections.
So Greg casts the Thoughtseize of his own. He looks at Ben's hand here. Bio Blight, Grey Merchant, and Asphodel, 3 lands. Not a lot going on thus far.
Yeah, the interesting positioning that takes place is in the games where neither player has an Underworld connections and both players just kind of have to make do. There's a lot of drawing off the top, which makes the mirror match kind of brutal. But there is a certain amount of, you know, picking your spots, figuring out based on what your opponent has, how you want to play the next few turns. But in my experience, whichever player draws 1 land less than the other person wins when neither player has connections.
Sure. And Greg, knowing that the coast is clear, at least from what he saw from Ben's hand, last turn deploys Desecration Demon. Putting Ben under some pressure to find a removal spell this turn. No removal spell, but a Desecration Demon of his own.
Wow, Devour Flesh is pretty big there.
Hero's Downfall as well. So Greg with a lot of answers. He just elects to go with the Hero's Downfall, animates his Mutavault, and attacks Ben for 8.
It's so tough, too, because with Ben starting down a card from the mulligan, it's like he's already 1 behind. You know, he has to get lucky just to be able to get ahead because both players are going to be in such an attrition-type situation. And with no immediate answer to Desecration Demon.
Yeah, the raw card count just matters so much. Ben here with a Grey Merchant. Draining gain of 2.
Yeah, he's got basically 2 turns to find an answer to that Desecration Demon.
Gray's going to go ahead and Devour Flesh the Grey Merchant. Animates his Mutavault. Attacks Ben for 8 again. Leaving him with Grey Merchant in hand. Ben plays another Scry land looking for some help.
It is not a Hero's Downfall or a Devour Flesh.
Ben plays a Grey Merchant, drains for 2 again. Going up to 10. Another Grey Merchant off the top for Greg.
I mean, this is game over if Ben does not sacrifice the, but he does.
Goes ahead and sacrifices it. Post-combat here, Greg's going to cast a Grey Merchant. This is a drain for 4. Ben now down to 6. Desecration Demon representing lethal next turn. And Greg again still has a Grey Merchant left over in his hand. I think Ben's hand is just Nightveil Spectre, Pack Rat. It would take some sort of miracle to get out of this bind.
Well, if he's got Night Veil, Spectre, and Pack Rat, at least he can produce some sacrifice food for the demon. He can buy himself a little bit of time here. He can use I mean, in theory, the Pack Rat could tap the demon, and the Night Veil Spectre could potentially block, and then he could attack and get more live draws off of Greg's deck.
I think this Gray Merchant is just lethal in Greg's hand, though.
If Greg has yet another Gray Merchant, this should be the ball game. Greg comes out to an early 1-0 lead. What's he got in the sideboard?
Well, Greg's sideboard here is an Erebos, God of the Dead, 3 Lifebane Zombies, a Drowned Sorrow, 2 Farika's Cures, 2 Dark Betrayal, 2 Doomblade, 4 Duresses. This is a pretty common mono black devotion sideboard. You see 4 copies of Duress you want to have access to for the Esper matchups, and then a variety of removal spells as appropriate. So I think we're going to see, of course, the Dark Betrayals come in. I think you're going to want the 4 Duresses in this matchup as well, as the games are very much about underworld connections. And the extra Erebos, God of the Dead, quite valuable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Not too much different on Ben's side. Ben's got 2 Ereboses, 3 Duress, so that both players after sideboard go up to 2 Erebos and 4 Duress. He's got a Dark Betrayal, possibly an ultimate price because he doesn't have that second Dark Betrayal. And that's basically it. It's just going to be a little tuning of removal. Have more answers to Desecration Demon and more ways to generate card advantage, and more ways to stop the other person's answers to Desecration Demon and to stop their card advantage.
It's pretty weird game, though. You rarely see Desecration Demon run away with things, at least in game 1 there, but Ben on a mulligan there got his hand attacked and just couldn't cobble together an answer.
Oh, yeah, and it's not always just Desecration Demon. Obviously, Pack Rat's the one that gets more credit a lot of the time, with Night Veil Spectre also being a possibility. It's interesting to see Night Veil Spectre back in popularity after Lifebane Zombie was kind of the end thing for a month.
Oh, definitely when Born of the Gods first hit the scene and Green Red Monsters was all over the place, moving to Lifebane Zombie made a lot of sense, but the metagame has kind of settled back down. You see a lot more Esper, you see a lot more mono black mirrors and black-white mid-range and so forth, so that card keeps bouncing back and forth, although I think Night Veil Spectre has swung back to the point where it's the more popular 3-drop for game 1. Most of us have access to
the zombie in the board?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that card's so powerful. It's the card that actually caused me to put down the white weenie deck I was working on for a while.
Oh, and switch to red?
Well, I was playing
Blazing
red.
new trails.
I was playing red, and then I decided to play white instead because I wanted to try out a really aggressive list with 21 drops. Mm-hmm. And then every time I lost to Lifebane Zombie, which was pretty frequent, when I thought to myself I could just be playing red instead, and that would just be...
That would just solve all the problems.
That card would just be utter nonsense instead of being game over. That's what caused me to switch back.
Who were your 21 drops?
Boros Elite,
yeah.
Drive Militant,
yeah.
Soldier of the Pantheon,
yeah.
Judges Familiar,
okay.
Loyal Pegasus.
Wow. All right.
All of them. That's all the knuckleheads.
Judges Familiar is a knucklehead.
Well, Judges Familiar in concert with Loyal Pegasus is a combo, because they can't block, obviously, so that's sweet. Mm-hmm. Judges Familiar is also randomly good against Mono Black Devotion quite often. They have Hero's Downfall in their deck, they have Drowned Sorrow post-board, so Judges Familiar can do some good work. And since when have we been too proud to cut Flying Man from our decks? I mean, seriously.
I mean, there are like 7 Flying Men legal in the format right now.
So,
you must like the new one. Journey to Nyx has that sweet new, it's a rare Flying Man. It's blue for a 1/1 flyer.
Sold.
And then it has...
powers, too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It gets better from here. You can bestow it for 5 blue.
Okay.
And give the creature +1/+1 flying and take control of it.
Okay. It's pretty rough to imagine the deck that's in the market for both Flying Man and 7-mana control magic, but...
with upside, control magic with upside.
Yeah, no, it's that's a sweet design.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, and this guy's a little different than most of the other bestow cards in that it isn't purely symmetrical between the two. There's this little extra control magic on the backside.
Yeah, most of the bestow designs are literally just grafting the text box of the creature onto a new creature.
Yeah, this guy, Hypnotic Siren, I mean, if you Hypnotic Siren somebody's Palakranos or Stormbreath Dragon or Desecration Demon, I mean, that's a whole thing right there.
That's a big game. Although I would argue this still follows the model of it has the text box, because when you cast this as a 1/1 for 1, you control it. So that part's already, that's like implied on the card. It's implied on
Yeah?
the card.
Yeah, you a big fan of this? Hey, have you guys seen the new special ability called ownership?
You own it. It's yours.
Dude, like for instance, there's red for a 1/1. You control this creature.
Yeah, it's implied.
That's a really great ability.
I understand it's a stretch. Ben taking another mulligan here. As you mentioned, so rough in this matchup. That's all about card count. And Ben opens up with a duress here. Sees a hand of 3 lands, 2 copies of Underworld Connections, and a Grey Merchant. Pretty close to an ideal hand for the
Yeah,
match.
this is just the Nutter Butters right here. This is what Greg wants. If Ben doesn't have a second discard spell, he's going to be in a real bad way. But from the looks of it, he might have the answer.
It looks like Ben has both duress and Underworld Connections of his own. So
Oh, so in this case, I mean, Ben's actually in the driver's seat because if he takes Greg's other Underworld Connections and follows it up with the connections of his own, with Greg not drawing one of his 8 discard spells, Ben will actually be, you know, in a real good spot.
So Ben duresses again to start off the second turn.
Let's see what you got under the hood.
Sees the same hand again. Greg just drew a land last turn. Ben scries and leaves it on top. Ben cannot untap quickly enough here. His Underworld Connection is not tagged by a discard spell, and he's going to deploy it.
No fear of encroaching wastes.
That's true. He is without fear for encroaching wastes. Ben goes ahead, activates the Underworld Connections.
This is how it starts.
This is, as you mentioned, the Nutter Butters from Ben.
Shout out to Michael Jacob, who actually talks like that.
All right, so another Thoughtseize here reveals a hand of, again, what we knew about before, Devour Flesh, and 2 copies of Grey Merchant. Takes the Devour Flesh. And Ben's tapping 2 to...
Goes ahead and gives him the business.
I was going to say, if this is Pack Rat, then that's the actual Nutter Butters. Thoughtseize from Greg.
Wow, did not play the pack rat. What do you make of that?
Maybe not wanting to give Greg the opportunity to top deck a removal spell, would rather try to play the Pack Rat with the ability to make a token right away. So Ben again uses the connections, animates and attacks with Mutavault. These discard spells feel a lot better before someone has a connections active than after.
Yeah.
Greg deploys the Grey Merchant in hand. With the trigger on the stack, Ben goes ahead and tags it with a Devour Flesh, untaps, activates connections again, attacks with Mutavault again.
The beats must go on.
And you can see how much the card advantage really matters in this matchup. It is about nothing but. Pack Rat off the top for Greg. Now maybe Greg switching to a plan B here, just hoping that Ben does not have an out to Pack Rat. Ben untaps, activates Underworld Connections.
Does have a fair bit of land in his hand.
Plays a second Mutavault, animates and attacks with the Mutavault. Greg says no blocks. And Ben passes back. And in turn, Greg's going to go ahead and make a rat.
And it looks like Ben has a Bile Blight.
And he's going to go ahead and use it. Takes care of both the rats. The change to the mirror match with Born of the Gods. Before, Pack Rat would be a runaway, and now players have a pretty good answer. Greg untaps, plays a Grey Merchant, again with the trigger on the stack. Ben going to go ahead and use a Dark Betrayal on it.
Ben's just got an answer to everything.
Well, when he's drawing 2 cards a turn to his opponent's 1, it's Not hard to muster.
Yep.
Duress from Ben reveals just a land in Greg's hand, fires up both his Mutavolts and attacks. Erebos got to the dead off the top for Greg, but...
I mean, at least he can draw some extra cards, but he's not going to be able to draw very many.
Yeah, I think he's
he needs
looking
to start
at
drawing
one.
some Gray Merchants.
Yeah, and he's already used 2. 2 are already gone. Ben again activates connections.
Continuing to Necro.
Both Mutavolts come across again, knocking Greg down to 6. And
No
Ben passes
fear.
turn. Greg activates Erebos, falls to 4.
That's pretty good. Is that a Bile Blight?
And a Mutavault, I think. It's not bad.
Doing it. Kind of doing it. Uh-oh. If Ben thought seizes oh yeah, this is gonna be a rough one.
Here's a Duress from Ben before combat.
It is the 4th Duress.
And Greg has no choice but to simply discard his copy of Bioblight, his source of protection here. Ben fires up both Mutavaults again, threatening a lethal attack. Greg goes to animate his Mutavault before blocks.
So there's still time. Yeah, he's going to activate Erebos, looking for a Bile Blight.
Yeah. Greg falls to 2. It is
And
Night
we
Veil
are
Spectre.
on to game
and
3. On to the next one.
card advantage matters a lot in these games.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's different removal spells that work on different creatures. There's the whole Bile Blight pack rat little interaction. There's having access to Thought Seizes and Duresses. But at the end of the day, if one player can stick a connections and take the other person's connections out of their hand, that's the most important battle in the game by a fair bit.
Yeah, sometimes life total can weirdly matter. I mean, these players are playing Underworld Connections, Thoughtseize, and Erebos, and Gray Merchant is present in both decks.
Oh, yeah.
So I have seen games where someone has gotten ahead on the card advantage count, but kind of gets punked out through damage. That's a dimension to the
That's
game.
a good way to put it.
That's a dimension of the game that can occur, but primarily it is about simply drawing more than your opponent. Because so many of these things just bang into each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's like watching an old Necro deck mirror match. Like you 2 Necro decks are facing each other. One of them's got a Necropotence in play, the other one doesn't. It can be kind of brutal. Occasionally, you'll get down low enough that somebody goes Dark Ritual, Lake of the Dead, Drain Life, and you die. But for the most part, it's not about getting punked out. It's about Necro.
Yeah. So you mentioned Encroaching Waste during the game. Is Encroaching Waste a card you feel is underplayed?
Nah.
Played 0?
It's played more than 0. It's just not played more than, I don't know,
Approximately
0.1. No, Encroaching Waste, the tough thing about Encroaching Waste is that who's using it? I mean, 4 Mutavaults already make it a lot harder to, they put some pressure on you. And then most of the monocolor decks have a lot of CC or CCC cards. So it's hard to play very many colorless cards. And then even like the control decks, they want to play Mutavaults instead of Encroaching Waste. So, there's not a lot of that going on right now, but there's also not a lot of lands you need to get rid of. I don't mind 1, though. Sometimes 1 as a 5th Mutavault of sorts.
Stone Radiant Esper is pretty sweet. I mean, they need all their mana, and their color mana situation is a little tentative.
Their mana is not as good as they would like to think it is.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Although, who knows, maybe Mana Confluence will make it a little easier for decks to be able to afford to have more colorless lands.
Yep.
My guess, though, Encroaching Waste, not gonna be that big a time. Mutavault's just too good.
It is just too good.
I really hope Mutavault is not an M15.
I'd be surprised.
My guess is that it won't be.
Wizards got to cash in those chips, and you can't go back to the well the second time and make as much money.
Not for a few years.
Yeah, you gotta wait. Game 3 underway here. Greg leads off with a Duress. Ben shows a hand of 2 lands, 2 pack rats, and Erebos, a Thoughtseize, and Underworld Connections.
The tough thing about taking connections here is that that there's Erebos just waiting in the wings,
Although Erebos is a lot less efficient at drawing cards than Connections is.
Exactly.
And it definitely makes the I can attack your life total plan much stronger.
Yep. Now, Greg does have 2 Connections, so he might not be afraid of the Thoughtseize. It's interesting, but he also kind of doesn't want Ben to know what he's doing, what he's working with.
Yeah.
Because Ben's 2 pack rats might prove to be kind of challenging.
And Ben's going to know now if the coast is clear through
Yep.
this Thoughtseize. So Greg goes ahead, takes the Connections, and Ben is going to lead with Thoughtseize. Shows a land light hand, Desecration Demon, Gray Merchant, and 2 copies of Underworld Connections.
Is there any chance you take the demon here and you're just like, who cares? Let him have the Connections.
Almost certainly not.
The second Connections does help, right? Like, even though like you only have so much life, getting the velocity on that card draw is well worth it.
I think the problem with taking the demon here is that it's just so. It seems very likely that Greg's just not going to be able to cast that demon on time. He doesn't even have a 3rd land in his hand right now. This is a tough choice, though. The Connections is on some amount of diminishing returns. Gray Merchant's also one of the most powerful cards in the mirror match. I mean, once you set aside the card drawers, it's one of the biggest games. So.
And with this many Underworld Connections and even the demon there, the prospects of the Merchant hitting for 6 or more are actually reasonably high.
Yeah. Looks like
He
Ben's
does
go
take the demon.
with the demon.
He ain't scared of nothing.
Gray Merchant off the top for Greg.
And now he's on the Turbo Pack Rat plan, figuring that the Underworld Connections is going to be a little slow, tie up a lot of mana. The second Underworld Connections would cost him an activation that turn, and there's a lot of ways of not affecting the board. Ben's just on the straight up pure race with Pack Rat plan.
Yeah. Greg would not have that much time to find a Bioblade here. What do you think about putting the Underworld Connections on a Swamp and not a Mutavault?
I think it's good.
It means that he can't draw Bioblade next turn.
Well, I think he's not going to want to Bile Blight yet anyway, just because he knows that Ben has another Pack Rat.
Mm-hmm. So Ben just goes ahead, activates his Pack Rat, puts another rat into play, and attacks for 2.
That is what you do when you have Pack Rat, is play more Pack Rats.
It's a combo.
It is.
With itself.
I was wondering, when do you think, do you ever put out, is Erebos ever worth not making a rat for? Because it will stop Greg from using that Gray Merchant to gain life.
Yeah, that's the tipping point. If you ever get to that stage, Greg gonna go ahead and Thoughtseize here. Sees Thoughtseize, Erebos, and Pack Rat. And Ben might be able to push ahead shortly with this Pack Rat to the point where it's outside of Bioblight range.
Yeah, and that's where things get scary. Will Greg take the backup Pack Rat, or does he want that Erebos that would threaten to shut down his Gray Merchant? He does take the Pack Rat.
So Ben untaps. You draw a Mutavault? That feels like the best draw on the deck right now. There's now these Pack Rats, now 3/3s, and he can threaten to make them a 4/4 with the Mutavault.
Oh, yeah.
So Ben comes trucking it on in for 6. And Greg is very quickly facing lethal here. Swamp off the top for Greg.
The matchup is definitely not all Underworld Connections. The Pack Rat games are a very real thing.
You got to attack. If it's not about Underworld Connections, you got to be attacking.
Yep. Gray Merchant just to buy a little bit of time.
It's a drain for 4, but
it is.
Ben is still threatening lethal with this attack.
And he's going to have such big Pack Rats. There's not really a lot that he can. I mean, this is just game over, right?
Well, he gets a chump block.
Right, but like, what's Greg hoping to draw?
Yeah, I don't think there's an answer long term to where this board's at.
I guess if he draws Bile Blight and then connections into another Bile Blight, but he's even short on the mana because he put it on a swamp instead of your Mutavault.
Yeah. So Gray Merchant on chump blocking detail. Ben goes ahead and activates a Pack Rat before damage. That's an attack for 8 coming across, knocking Gray down to 5. Gray taps and draws, and
that's likely to be all she wrote. Pack Rat, weak to Bile Blight at times, but certainly has the ability to grow beyond it.
And the post-board games where you have so much discard, you're much more informed about when the coast is clear to try to run that gamut. Pretty impressive the way that Ben played this game. I mean, he chose a path based on that Thoughtseize
and just look, the extra connections just sitting in Greg's hand. Very just calculating, what's more likely to have an impact the way that this game is going to have to play out.
Greg just picks up a swamp, and that Gray Merchant's not going to provide nearly enough of a drain here. Only a drain for 4, which knocks him up to 8, and that's just not going to be enough. Ben Wienburg 2-1 in the Mono Black Devotion mirror match.
Nice match.
Played it pretty skillfully, in my opinion.
Definitely.
Figured out a road and didn't deviate.
Yeah, Ben is definitely an Open Series veteran at this point. I mean, I wonder, do we have any idea how many he's played in?
I mean, he's played in?
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably mine the data given enough time, but I don't know. Quite a few. I mean, north of 20 or 25 would be my guess. At least one invitational top 8 that I can recall.
I feel like we've covered him north of 25 times.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's, again.
There's also the Legacy Opens too, though.
Yes.
Ben, also known for his play in Eternal formats.
Big Rug fan, plays Rug Delver in a lot of tournaments. Not that that's really a defining characteristic of a human being anymore, but it was it was for a time.